Matt DiBenedetto will not return to Rackley RLL Racing in 2024, and Ty Majeski was handed some pretty big penalties. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got to NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead and start and talk about Sports Radar. As it was announced on Tuesday morning, the Sports Radar has announced a 4-year extension with NASCAR. NASCAR's had a partnership with Sports Radar for a very long time. They do live timing. They also do some betting and some gambling as well. I think it's really cool to see NASCAR's announced this partnership with this company for the next 4 years. They've had a long-term partnership. Glad to see that they're going to continue working with NASCAR. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Darlington purse money. Every time we have a NASCAR Cup, Xfinity Series, and Truck Series, Bob Pockets puts out the purse money. And according to Bob Pockets, for the Cup Series, it's $8,260,258, and for the Xfinity Series, it's $1,703,502. That's some pretty big purse money for this weekend. One of the higher purse monies, I think, actually for the Xfinity Series in 2023. And for the Cup Series, well, it's a little more upside, I think, of the playoffs, and also, of course, when it comes to the charter teams, they get more of the purse. So, honestly, I think that's some pretty good purse money for this weekend. I love that, and I'm definitely glad to see that more teams are going to be getting more money. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about some rule changes. So NASCAR, and according to Jeff Gluck and Bob Pockers, NASCAR made some updates to the rule book. And first thing they did was the distance rules. When it comes to basically shortening races due to like weather and shortening distance when it comes to time, they have changed that. And they've also changed the testing policy. Basically, they said world-class drivers, you have to be in IndyCar, World Endurance Championship, F1, had to compete in some other series in order to get a chance to do testing. Because NASCAR has put a ban on testing for a lot of drivers who come into NASCAR. But if you've come from like a world-class series, they're going to allow you to do some testing. So I find it very interesting. I find it fascinating and interesting to see that NASCAR has made a change when it comes to that. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Dawson Cram. As it was announced a couple days ago that Dawson Cram will drive the 44 for Alpha Prime Racing this weekend at Darlington. This weekend, Alpha Prime Racing is going to do some really cool throwbacks for the Darlington weekend. But really cool to see Dawson Cram is getting our opportunity and a shot. I think Dawson Cram does have some talent. He hasn't ran a lot this year. He's driven, of course, a lot for the 17-14 for CHK Racing. And we've seen him have some pretty impressive practice runs, especially at Martinsville. But unfortunately, they, of course, failed to qualify for that event. But I do think Dawson Cram does have a little bit of talent. I'm very intrigued to see how he's going to do this weekend, and glad to see he's getting a chance and an opportunity to drive for Alpha Prime Racing. Hopefully, he can do really good and have a strong run this weekend with the team at Darlington. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the NASCAR Playoffs. As this year's NASCAR Playoffs is going to have 10 teams that are represented this year. You have 2 drivers, Hendrick Motorsports, 2 teams from RFK Racing. Both 2211 race cars also made it as well. You have 3 Joe Gibbs Racing drivers that made it. You've also got 1 Richard Childress Racing driver, that being Kyle Busch. You've got 10 Front Row Motorsports in there as well. You've got 1 Stewart-Haas Racing driver, that being Kevin Harvick. You have 10 teams represented, which is a record for NASCAR. I think the previous high have been 8 or 9. So it's really cool to see all the different representation of teams. It shows how competitive the field has gotten. You've got a lot of really good drivers racing this year. Kyle Larson. You've got Bubba Wallace, Kyle Busch. You've got a lot of drivers who are going to be competing for the championship this year, and I think it is stacked for 2023. Love seeing all these teams and drivers competing. It's a really stacked playoffs, and glad to see we have broken a new record for teams in the playoffs. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Simon Pagenaud. As Simon Pagenaud announced on social media on Monday morning that he will not run the rest of the 2023 season as he does not feel 100% and he has not recovered from his injuries. For those who do not know, Simon Pagenaud was involved in a crash in Mid-Ohio during qualifying or practice and has not been able to race since then. First of all, we're thinking about Simon Pagenaud. Hopefully he'll be back to the racetrack in 2024. If I'm not mistaken, Tom Blomqvist, who will be driving full-time for Meyershank Racing in 2024, taking over the 06 car, he will be driving the rest of the 2023 season. It won't be Linus Lundqvist. It will be Tom Blomqvist, who's going to be full-time next year. We're thinking about Simon Pagenaud currently at the moment. Hopefully he recovers from his injuries and hopefully back at the racetrack in 2024. It's a great opportunity, though, for Tom Blomqvist, and glad to see he's getting a chance and an opportunity to make more starts as we get more seat time and more experience. Hopefully Simon Pagenaud does recover from his injuries. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Yuri Vips. As it was announced a couple days ago on Monday that Yuri Vips will drive the 30 for RLL Racing for the rest of the 2023 season. Yuri Vips has been involved in a lot of controversy over the last couple years. Obviously, he said something I'm not going to say, that he lost his ride from the Red Bull Academy. Now, Yuri Vips has been testing in IndyCar, and while I think it was really controversial what he did, and what he did I think was unacceptable a few years ago, I will say that everyone does deserve a second chance, and hope he can take the best of it in the 30 car. Now, there were better drivers that were available. Robert Schwartzman had been available, and also, from what I understand, Philippe Nasser had also been available to potentially drive as well, Philippe Nasser. So, very interesting for sure, and we'll see what happens to Yuri Vips. Hope he can do a really good job at RLL Racing. Obviously, Jack Harvey's no longer with the team anymore. Hopefully, Yuri Vips can do a really, really solid and a really good job in the 30 car, but I'm not sure because this 30 car has struggled in the 2023 season, so I'm not really sure if we're going to see too much from him and if he's going to do a good job. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Andretti Global. Now, yesterday it was reported by Adam Stern that the word is that the FIA will soon announce that it has no objection in Andretti Global getting in an F1 entry. The bad news is that to generate an entry, one also needs an agreement from the F1 group, and there seems to be no interest at all. Obviously, a lot of people from the FIA want Andretti Global to get into Formula 1. However, a lot of the Formula 1 teams have been against letting Andretti Global get in there, including teams like Mercedes, and majority of teams don't want him in there, which doesn't really make a lot of sense to me because obviously if F1 is going to grow in the United States, in my opinion, you need to have an American-based team. And if you don't have an American-based team, people will say Haas F1, but yes, it is an American team driven by Gene Haas, but they're not a team that's ran in the United States, really. They're ran basically in Europe, and they still get their stuff from Ferrari, which is interesting if they're one of the teams that's against this move because they've been one of the biggest struggling teams. And a lot of people have been against it, which, again, I don't think makes any sense to me. Andretti Global would be really competitive. You have drivers like Colton Herta who want to go to Formula 1. That's why Colton Herta signed a multi-year contract extension with Andretti Autosport because he wants to go to Formula 1. And it's a shame to me you have teams like Andretti who are denied opportunities and shots to go over and race in Formula 1 because they want to go to Formula 1, right? And I just don't love the fact that they're getting denied the opportunity and shot. I know that the FIA wants them. Mohammed Ben Suleiman, who of course is running the FIA, he wants it to happen. You've got people like Stefano Domenicali, he's kind of against it. I really hope that these teams can get it sorted out. They're trying to increase the entry and how much to get in. I think it's frustrating. I don't like the fact that they're increasing the entry just so people can't get in. I think it's disappointing and overall just not a good look for them, in my opinion. Hopefully they can get this resolved so they can come to Formula 1. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. As it was announced early this morning that both Lewis Hamilton and George Russell have signed multi-year contract extensions with Mercedes that will go through the 2025 season. There have been rumors that Lewis Hamilton might leave at the end of the 2023 Formula 1 season to go to a team like Ferrari, but those rumors have been dashed very, very quickly with Lewis Hamilton signing this multi-year extension, which isn't a shock and surprise. Lewis Hamilton has been driving for Mercedes, I believe, since 2013 or 2014, and has had a lot of success. And while Mercedes is not the top team they used to be a few years ago, Lewis Hamilton is still a pretty solid driver. He's had a couple podiums this year, and I believe he's still in the top 5 in points in Formula 1. And to me, is still one of the greatest Formula 1 drivers we have ever seen. When it comes to George Russell's had an up and down year in 2023. He's had some highs and he's had some lows this year. Obviously, last year did win the Brazilian Grand Prix, got his first ever Formula 1 victory, and I think George Russell does have a little bit of talent as well. I mean, the guy won a Formula 1 race. You can't win an F1 race unless you don't have talent. I think this is a really good decision from both Mercedes to keep both Lewis Hamilton and George Russell staying with the team going into next year. I think it's a great decision. I like the fact they're keeping him for next year. This, again, I'm glad to see it. I would imagine Lewis Hamilton's probably going to be deciding retirement in the not-so-distant future, probably like 2026 or 2027 is my guess, because Lewis Hamilton is 38, so he's going to be 40 by the end of his contract, which will be the end of his Formula 1 career. But hey, Fernando Alonso's still around, so maybe he'll be like Fernando Alonso and stay around for a much longer time. But at this point, I think Lewis Hamilton's going to win races. He might win before the end of the year, but with how dominant Red Bull is, it might be tough to do that. Maybe, just maybe, they can break the Red Bull string. But we'll see what happens. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brad Keselowski. Now, we kind of talked about this on the channel, but basically during the red flag, Brad Keselowski's car caught on fire. And under the red flag, he was doing circles down the backstretch. Now, there was a lot of people wondering what was NASCAR going to decide in regards to that. Well, Ellen Sawyer went on SiriusXM NASCAR radio, and he spoke on the no penalty call. And he actually gave Brad Keselowski a lot of credit for making this decision. Now, NASCAR usually does not let drivers work on their cars under the red flag. And I saw this being a big hot take and a huge conversation from people in the industry, especially Brett Griffin. But in my opinion, I think NASCAR absolutely made the right call to not penalize Brad Keselowski. Number one, as Ellen Sawyer said, he didn't advance this position because he was in first place. Number two, he had a fire in his car. And we don't want drivers getting hurt. You want to basically find a way to do this. And I think what Brad Keselowski did was actually genius, in my opinion, by going basically down to the bottom, not affecting the outcome of the race because it was under the red flag, and he was not working on his car. He was basically trying to get a fire out and not destroy his car, which these cars cost a lot of money. And I'm still, if I'm not mistaken, think we're still kind of in a shortage with these cars currently at the moment. So in my opinion, I think Brad Keselowski did the right thing. I think he made the right call to go ahead and go to the infield and go ahead and try to put the fire out. So I think it was the right decision, the right call, and I'm very glad to see that they've gone ahead and made that decision. I think it was absolutely the right call to not penalize him, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Chicago Street Course. Now, it was reported by Adam Stern on Monday evening that according to him, Chicago Alderman says he has a poll conducted showing that 54.5% of residents do not support the Chicago race. But admits the poll was not scientific and may have attracted a sample of negative individuals. Obviously, we did have the first ever Chicago Street Race and the first NASCAR Cup Series Street Course race in July. And obviously, it's not a shocking surprise. We have a lot of people that were negative about the event. And while the event itself was kind of a little bit of a frustrating with all how they kind of handled how Chicago handled it, I think at the end of the day, it was at least somewhat of a success with Shane Van Gisbergen going on to win. And it's very likely at this point that Shane Van Gisbergen is going to be full-time in NASCAR altogether in the 2024 season, running a Cup, Xfinity, and trucks. I do think it's going to be very interesting to see if they do come back to Chicago in 2023, I should say. Personally, I think they have till January 1st or January 2nd to make a decision if they're going to come back. If you want my opinion, I want this event to come back in 2024 because I think it'd be really, really good for this event to come back. I think it'd be very, very successful. So we'll see what happens in regards to that. But to me, I think that they are going to come back in 2024 with the sex event. If they don't come back, though, my best guess is they are going to go to Chicagoland because Chicagoland is ready to go and race. They're doing motocross racing here in the next 2 weeks. I'm really excited about that, by the way. But I really hope they do come back to Chicago because I think it was a very successful event. And hopefully we do see the Chicago Street Course race return in the 2024 season. Hopefully that does end up happening. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. Now, we do have a couple Denny Hamlin stories to discuss today on the channel, but the first story revolves around Denny Hamlin driving the number 19 for Joe Gibbs Racing Xfinity Series this weekend at Darlington. Usually Denny Hamlin only runs one Xfinity Series race every single year, and it tends to be the fall Darlington race. Now, Denny Hamlin, I think, has a really great chance and a really great opportunity to win this event. The 19 car hasn't really fast this year. Charbane did a really good job, albeit he did make a little bit of a bad block at the race at Daytona, but no, I do blame Austin Hill for that wreck. We've seen Charbane do really good in his one start. He's going to run a couple more races with the team. We've also seen Ty Gibbs win in this car once or twice. Should have won that Watkins Glen race, and also did win the Indy Road Course in dominating fashion. And we also saw Ryan Truex go on to win at Dover, and he's trying to get a full-time ride with Joe Gibbs Racing for next year. I think Denny Hamlin, with how good he's been at Darlington Xfinity, where he's won quite a few Xfinity Series races at Darlington, I do believe Denny Hamlin will be a threat to win. I think he's got a really great chance and a really great opportunity to win, and it would not surprise or shock me if he does end up winning in the 19 car with Joe Gibbs Racing, because I think this car is going to be extremely competitive, and I think he's got a great chance to win the race. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carson Hocevar. As it was announced on Monday that Carson Hocevar will drive the 42 for Legacy Motor Club this weekend at Darlington. Initially, Carson Hocevar was going to drive the 77 car for Spire Motorsports in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, but he's putting his full focus on racing in the Cup Series. This is a really great opportunity for Carson Hocevar because, in my opinion, Carson Hocevar, he's likely to be full-time in the Cup Series with Spire Motorsports in 2024. So it makes a lot of sense for him to get some more Cup Series starts. And while I don't think this car has been really good and it has struggled in the NASCAR Cup Series here with drivers like Josh Berry and Noah Gragson, Carson Hocevar, I think, can get the best out of equipment. Remember, in his NASCAR Cup Series debut at Gateway when he drove a 7 for Spire, he was running in 16th position and had issues where they really didn't have any data going on, so there was basically a lighting outage going on, and before the brake rotor failure, he was running in the top 16 and had a chance to get a top 15, which is extremely impressive in your debut. While I don't think Carson Hocevar is going to have an amazing run, I think he could shock a lot of people and maybe get a top 25, which would be really good for this car's standards. So I think Carson Hocevar is going to have a decent run. I think he'll be somewhat of a contender at least for top 25, but I don't think this car is going to be contending for victories. If he drove like a Hendrick Motorsports car, he'd probably be going out there contending for victories, but I think this is a great opportunity for him, and glad to see he's getting a chance and opportunity to drive the number 42 car for Legacy Motor Club. And now we're going ahead to move on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Asterix. Now, it was reported by Adam Stern on Monday morning that according to him, that the Asterix is in talks to host a race in the Middle East, possibly in Saudi Arabia or Qatar, as soon as the end of 2024. Standalone event, 8 U.S. drivers, 4 host drivers, and 4 from elsewhere. Now, Don Hawk did comment on so this is something that they're kind of talking about. They're in preliminary talks. But obviously, when it comes to money, this does not shock or surprise me. But it's kind of a little bit of shocking as well because the Asterix, when you think of the Asterix, they're kind of in a series that does race generally in the United States, so they've never raced outside the U.S. at this point. They haven't raced out of the U.S., but it's very interesting that they're kind of talking about this, and it would be very controversial, I would say. Now, this is something that probably would happen in the later portion of the year, sometime in like December 2023 or 2024. Do I think this is something that's in the preliminary talks? I do find it interesting. I do find it a little fascinating, but I also do find it's not the greatest decision that they would make overall if they were to decide to do this. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, how long the story falls. We'll see what drivers do get brought in. To me, the 8 U.S. drivers like Tony Stewart would come in there. I would imagine Brad Keselowski's among the drivers in conversation for that. Maybe Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson will be among the drivers who could race over there. But again, would they be willing to go over there? That's something very interesting to watch. But I think right now it's just in the preliminary talks and conversations. But it's something to definitely keep your eyes out on that could end up happening. And now we're going ahead to move on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. As it was announced and reported by Austin Ensi from Sportsnet that Kyle Busch will drive the tent for Kaulig Racing this weekend at Darlington. This will be Kyle Busch's final start of 5 starts for the 2023 season in Xfinity, which will be the first time that Kyle Busch would have failed to win a race when he's ran the Xfinity Series since 2012. Now, he did technically not win last year in 2022. Remember, he did not race in 2022 in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Now, I do think Kyle Busch has a really great chance and an opportunity to win in this car because this 10 car has already won this year at Darlington with Kyle Larson, which we'll talk about Kyle Larson here in just a little bit. But I think Kyle Busch has a really great chance. Kaulig Racing historically has been really great at this racetrack. They've had some solid runs, and we've seen other drivers who driven for Kaulig Racing have some pretty good runs at this track. So I do think Kyle Busch has a really great chance and a really strong possibility of winning. I think he'll be a threat. I think he'll be a contender, and I think he'll have a great chance and opportunity to win in the 10 car for Kaulig Racing. So I do expect that Kyle Busch will for sure be a threat to win with Kaulig Racing. And now we're going ahead to move on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Joe Gibbs Racing. We're going to talk about some other pit crew changes here in just a little bit, but Joe Gibbs Racing was announced on Tuesday late evening that they are going to be swapping Christopher Bell's and Ty Gibbs pit crews, meaning that Christopher Bell's pit crew that he's had all year moving over to work with Ty Gibbs, and Ty Gibbs pit crews working with Ty Gibbs all year moving over to work with Christopher Bell. Now, why is this move happening? Well, let's take a look at statistics. Christopher Bell's pit crew has been the 20th fastest pit crew overall in the 2023 season. You compare that to Ty Gibbs' pit crew. Ty Gibbs' pit crew has been the 3rd fastest pit crew overall this year. And remember, this pit crew won the pit crew competition at North Wilkesboro for the All-Star Weekend, which I think was a really great pit crew competition, by the way. I think this is a really good move, and because Ty Gibbs is not in the playoffs, Christopher Bell is in the playoffs. And I think they want to give Christopher Bell's pit crew the Ty Gibbs pit crew to Christopher Bell's, because they want to give Christopher Bell the best chance and opportunity to compete for wins and compete for victories and have better execution. Which I think if they go to Bell's pit crew, you're going to see Bell perform better on pit road, because that's been one of the biggest Achilles heel for that number 20 team, has been their issues on pit road. So I think this overall is a really, really good move from Joe. Well, it's a controversial move, I would say, but I think it's not the worst move overall I've ever seen from a team. Teams tend to do this all the time, and it's not a major shock and major surprise that they are going on and do this. So not shocked and surprised by this move, and it's very interesting. But again, I think it's the right. I don't know if it's the right move because it's controversial, but again, teams do this when they're in a playoff run. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Daytona TV ratings from this past weekend. So Oscar Kondensky from Motorsports Wire put out a thing talking about this. And according to him, NBC earned a 3.268 million viewers at Daytona. That is down 18% from 3.928 million viewers in 2021. Now, last year's race in 2022, I think only had 1.922 million viewers, but that, of course, was actually 1.4 million viewers, I should say, because that was on CNBC on Sunday early morning, which a lot of people were not tuning in, because a lot of people do not have CNBC, because a lot of people have cut away from cable. Now, 3.268 million viewers, there is something that needs to be noted about that. Remember, there was a lot of preseason NFL football going on, so a lot of areas, including the Tampa Bay area and other areas like Tulsa, were affected by this because of preseason football that was going on, which I think is very, very unfortunate. That's something that NBC needs to negotiate a little bit better going forward, is find a way that you don't have that, because in my personal opinion, I'd rather watch a NASCAR cutoff race side to make the playoffs over preseason football. But football is king in this country. So that's a big reason why the ratings did drop off. I know people think we say, oh, the ratings drop off and stuff, but in my opinion, that is a huge reason why the ratings are down as much as they are, and the viewership is down as much as it is. And I do think you're going to see some huge ratings drops because of Chase Elliott not being in the playoffs. So I do think with him being in the Owners' Points playoffs, I do think you're still going to see a lot of people tune in. But I don't think a lot of people compare. I don't think as many fans really can't care as much for the owner class as much as the teams do, because that's where the money does come into play. But in my opinion, it is disappointing to see that viewership is down, but there's reasons for that. And had there not been blackouts in certain areas of the country, I do believe that the viewership would have been up a lot more than it ended up being up. So I'm not surprised and shocked. I expected there was going to be some viewership drops, but it is disappointing nonetheless to see the viewerships dropped a little bit. And again, I do think you're going to see some viewership drops with the Son of Heaven being on USA. But again, I'm not so sad. I'm not shocked. I'm disappointed, but I'm not shocked and surprised that there was some viewership drops in these areas. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bubba Wallace. Now, Bubba Wallace was under a lot of bit of controversy for comments that Kyle Petty said. Now, Bubba Wallace decided to not be interviewed by NASCAR and NBC as he was focusing on trying to make the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs for the first time in his NASCAR Cup Series career, which, by the way, he was able to do that. So congratulations to Bubba Wallace on that. Well, Kyle Petty went on with NASCAR NBC podcast, and Nate Ryan was also kind of calling out Bubba Wallace and Ty Gibbs on this as well. But Kyle Petty says if he's mentally that fragile, then maybe this is not the game for him. First of all, I find those comments from Kyle Petty to be a little bit disrespectful and very distasteful in my opinion. I'm not going to get into specifics on why it's that, but I don't find that to be very respectful from Kyle Petty. Look, had Bubba Wallace been already in the playoffs, I guarantee you he would have done interviews much, much easier. Also, he had already done his media obligations for earlier in the week. It was reported by Jordan Bianchi on the Teardown podcast with Jeff Clark that he had already done his media obligations on a Zoom call. And he's not the only driver in NASCAR history, by the way, to blow off interviews. Look at Ty Gibbs. Ty Gibbs was kind of blowing off basically the questions and was saying, I'm mysterious so I don't get fined. Kyle Busch has done that before. Do you all remember 2019 in Las Vegas? He was kind of blowing off interviews then. So drivers have done this before. This is nothing new in NASCAR history. Drivers blowing off interviews. So I didn't really completely understand why Kyle Petty was kind of going off on Bubba Wallace there. I feel like this was a non-story that Kyle Petty got a little bit frustrated with. And Kyle Petty's done this a lot with Denny Hamlin's drivers in the past. He's kind of called out Bubba Wallace in the past before. He said Bubba Wallace should have been last year suspended for the rest of the year after what he did to Kyle Larson, which maybe he should have. I don't completely disagree. He should have been suspended at least one race, but maybe he should have been suspended for the rest of the year. I don't know. But to me, I don't completely agree with Kyle Petty's comments. I found him a little bit distasteful, and it was very, very controversial. Had he said something not as controversial as what he said, it's probably wouldn't have been his biggest stories he said. But in my opinion, I don't like that he called him mentally fragile. I found that a little bit offensive, and I think it was overall not the best choice of words that we've seen from Kyle Petty. I think he retracted those statements in a later podcast, but in my opinion, I do not love the fact that he called Bubba Wallace mentally fragile. I find that a little bit offensive, and I find that a little bit disrespectful on Kyle Petty's part. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. As there was report from Oscar Nensi from Motorsports Wire that Kyle Larson will drive the 17 for Hendrick Motorsports this weekend at Darlington in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Now, this is now the second race that Kyle Larson will be running in the NASCAR Xfinity Series at Darlington Raceway this year. As remember, Kyle Larson did drive the 10-car Fur Collar Racing with HendrickCars.com sponsorship, and Kyle Larson went on to win that race. I think Kyle Larson has to be the favorite going into this race because of how good he's been at Darlington in his NASCAR Xfinity career. And let's not forget, he was part of that magical finish that happened in 2022 at this track with Sheldon Creed and Noah Gragson, and was probably going to win that race and had the fastest car on the racetrack and led quite a few laps in that race as well. I do believe that Kyle Larson is going to be a favorite. He's actually my pick to win this race because Kyle Larson has been very, very good at this racetrack throughout his NASCAR Xfinity Series career. So I do believe that Kyle Larson has a great chance and opportunity to win. I think he is going to win this race, and I think it's a great opportunity for Kyle Larson. He's back in the Xfinity Series. It's his last chance and opportunity to win. And it'd be really cool for the 17 car to win. One of the goals for Hendrick Motorsports has been to win with this number 17 car. Hendrick has not won the Xfinity Series since 2009. They've come up so close, but so far at times. He almost won Alex Bowman a few weeks ago at Watkins Glen, and they almost won at Sonoma when Kyle Larson dominated. And let's be honest, he probably should have won that race at Sonoma in the Xfinity Series, but unfortunately made a mistake, got into the tire barrier, and he yanked his car to the left. Overall, I think it's a great opportunity for Kyle Larson. I think he'll have a great chance and opportunity to win with the number 17 team this weekend at Darlington in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Team Penske. As it was announced on Monday evening that Team Penske is going to be announcing some new crew chief changes for this event. And it's going to be basically a trade. So, Jerry Bones, who's been crew chiefing for Austin Cindric, is going to be moving away from working with Austin Cindric, and he'll be working with Harrison Burton going forward. Brian Wilson, who's been working with Harrison Burton this year, moving away from working with Harrison Burton and moving to work with Austin Cindric. Now, why is Team Penske making his crew chief changes? When you look at Team Penske this year in 2023, all the teams have really struggled. Even Joey Logano, who has won a race this year, and Ryan Blaney, who's won a race this year, they both have had down years in 2023. So I do like the fact that they're making these major shakeups. And let's look at a little bit of historical context. Brian Wilson has worked with Austin Cindric in the past. And guess what Brian Wilson did with Austin Cindric in the Xfinity Series? They won like 10 or 11 races together, and in 2020, they won the NASCAR Xfinity Series Championship. And they almost won the championship in 2021 as well, and they lost only in a photo finish with Daniel Hemmer by like 2/100ths of a second. So it was a really close finish there. And I love it when you have these younger drivers who get an opportunity to work with old crew chiefs. Look at Rudy Fiegel and William Byron. Since William Byron and Rudy Fiegel have started working together, they have been way more competitive. And look what they've done in 2023. Rudy Fiegel and William Byron combined have won 5 races here, and William Byron has a really great chance and a really great opportunity to win the NASCAR Cup Series Championship. He's my championship pick, as a matter of fact. And Team Penske need to make some changes, so I think overall this is going to be a really good move for both Brian Wilson and Austin Cindric, and I think Jerry Bones will actually do a really good job helping Harrison Burton get a lot better. So I think this is going to work out for both parties, and I think this generally is a really good move by by Team Penske, because I think Brian Wilson and Austin are going to do a lot better in 2024. And again, it sounds like at this point Harrison Burton is going to be coming back to the Wood Brothers next year, though it hasn't been officially announced yet. It sounds like at this point this is effective for 2023 and 2024. And also Bob Pockers had reported they're moving some of the other personnel, including the car chiefs as well. So to me, I think this is overall a really, really awesome, a really, really great move. And I love the fact that they're making these changes because in my opinion, I think this is going to benefit both Austin and Harrison Burton. I think both drivers are going to end up doing a lot better in 2024. So we'll see what happens. But overall, I think this is a really awesome and great move by Team Penske. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. Now, we've talked about Denny Hamlin quite a bit on this channel when it comes to the contract negotiations and the contract talks. Well, Joe Gibbs went on Asterix and NASCAR Radio on Tuesday, and he spoke on the Denny Hamlin contract negotiations that are going on. He said that they're getting close to hopefully having a deal signed, and they're hoping to make an announcement really, really soon. But Joe Gibbs did note that a deal has not been signed yet. Now, it needs to be known Denny Hamlin does have a contract ready to go for 2024 with Joe Gibbs Racing. However, he has not signed that contract currently at the moment with Joe Gibbs Racing to go back to a team in 2024 because of the Toyota deal and 23XI Racing. Very similar to Denny Hamlin's contract with Toyota and Joe Gibbs Racing. 23XI Racing is in a contract year with Toyota, and there have been some rumors circulating that 23XI Racing could head to Ford in 2024, though they have said publicly that that is not going to happen, but there's a possibility that that could happen in 2024 if they cannot strike a deal. Now, people are going to kind of bring up the Kyle Busch situation. This is kind of similar to the Kyle Busch situation, but it's also very, very different. Number one, with the Kyle Busch, it was a sponsor situation. With Denny Hamlin, it's a manufacturer deal with 23XI Racing. You would have to think that they are talking to Ford because we know the history of how Joe Gibbs handled teams that have been under their group. Look at Furniture Racing. Furniture Racing went to Toyota in 2016. They won the championship in 2017. And then the next year, they left in 2018 and shut their program down because Joe Gibbs jacked the price up for the team and 5 Hour Energy left as a sponsor. So that's why Furniture Racing shut down. And then they brought Martin Truex Jr. in. You think also about the fact that they had Levine Family Racing under a deal, and Levine shuts down, they bring Chris RLL in. I think 23XI Racing is looking out for their best interests. Now, do I think a deal is going to get signed for Denny Hamlin and for Joe Gibbs Racing? I think more than likely a deal is going to get signed. But, again, we're getting into the later stages of the year, and we're almost in September now, and the fact that a deal has not been signed does bring a little bit of concern. I'm 80-85% confident that there is going to be a deal signed here. I know that they've kind of said in the next week or two they want to have a deal signed. But it's almost been a week now, and we still don't have a deal signed, and we're getting into September. So this is starting to feel like what happened with Kyle Busch last year, and it does concern me just a little bit. To me, though, in my honest opinion, I do think they're going to get this figured out. I think they do get the situation resolved. But I really hope they can get this resolved in the not-so-distant future because this is a pretty big issue, the fact that they do not have a deal signed for Denny Hamlin and for Joe Gibbs Racing because Denny Hamlin's been with this team since 2004 when he started making Xfinity starts with the team and has been with the team in the Cup Series since 2006. We know he wants to stay with Joe Gibbs Racing, Denny Hamlin does, but it all comes down to the manufacturer deal with Toyota. So we'll see what happens in regards to that. Hoping they get a deal situation resolved, get this deal figured out, so we can see Denny Hamlin back at Joe Gibbs Racing next year in 2024 and finish his career. Because Denny Hamlin is probably going to retire in the next years. I think Denny Hamlin's got 2 or 3 years left maximum in his career, so 2026 I think could be his last year. But I do think Denny Hamlin will stay with JHR. But it all comes down to the funding and sponsorship and all that. It's not really funding. It all comes down if 23XI can strike a deal. Because there have been some rumors that SHR could downsize their team to 2 cars next year if they're on roll potential retiring. But we'll have to see what happens in regards to that. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Ty Majeski. Now, it was officially announced on Tuesday that Ty Majeski has been handed some pretty massive penalties and has been handed an L2 penalty. Now, why has he been handed an L2 penalty? Well, on Sunday, it was announced the team, before the race had happened, had their tires confiscated. Basically, early in the week, they had a tech inspection, and they had an L2 penalty handed because they were messing with the wheels. They're messing with the Holy Trinity part of the car. The Holy Trinity is if you mess with the tires, the fuel, or the engine, you could be handed some pretty big penalties. And that's what exactly they did, was they messed with the Holy Trinity. So they've been handed a 75-point penalty and 5 playoff points been handed. On top of that, Joe Shear Jr. has been suspended for the next 4 races and has been handed a $25,000 fine. Now, this is a pretty big penalty, but this isn't the biggest penalty in the world for many reasons, because Ty Majeski has been locked into the next round. There have been some talks and conversations from industry personnel that this penalty could have been a lot bigger than it ended up being, because a lot of people thought that maybe they were going to remove his playoff eligibility, because a lot of people do feel like that this had been used at Richmond and also had been used at Indianapolis Raceway Park as well. But they get to keep their win from IRP, and they also get to keep their win, or if they could have won the Richmond, they've been able to keep their win as well. What's very interesting to note is that Ty Majeski did not perform as well at Milwaukee as he'd done the previous couple races. But to be fair, he had to start at the rear. He had to go through a pass-through penalty. And also, it was kind of difficult to pass at Milwaukee as well. It's very difficult to pass in a truck series. You have to be very, very aggressive, kind of similar to the Cup series. But it's very difficult to pass. But to me, this penalty kind of feels like nothing burger. But it will be a little bit of an issue because the 5 playoff points will have a little bit of effect. But you remember, Ty Majeski's got a lot of playoff points now. And basically just lose the playoff points that he had received. But again, this probably should have gone effect into the next round and not affected him from this round. I feel like this penalty should have been used for the next round. But again, NASCAR said this publicly when it comes to these cars or trucks. Do not mess with these cars or trucks, because if you do, you're going to get handed some pretty penalties. But again, to me, this isn't as big a penalty as I thought it was going to end up being. Now, we haven't seen them appeal, and again, I don't think they're going to appeal this penalty. It had to gone into the next round. I would imagine that this team was going to appeal the penalty, but the fact that this penalty is not going into effect until the next round, it's going to only affect this round. It, to me, is the reason why they're not appealing the penalty. It's been 2 days now, and there's been no appeal. They had basically, I think, 48 hours to appeal, and it's been close to 40 hours now since the penalty had come out. I don't agree with the decision to wait till this round to penalize him. Again, I expect there to be penalties, but I feel like this penalty is kind of like a nothing burger, very similar to the Hendrick Motorsports penalty. So in my opinion, I'm not shocked by this, but interesting to see that they've been handed some pretty big penalties. But again, don't mess with these cars or trucks, and then you probably won't be penalized. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Matt DiBenedetto. Now, yesterday, it was shockingly announced that Matt DiBenedetto will not be returning to Rackley WAR Racing in 2024. Now, Matt DiBenedetto does say in his statement that he is really appreciative of everything that he's done with Rackley WR. He wants to thank Curtis and Willie for giving a chance and opportunity to drive for the team. And Rackley WR Racing also released a statement thanking Matt DiBenedetto for everything they've done, and they're still focused on trying to make it to the next round of the NASCAR Truck Series Playoffs. The timing of this announcement is very interesting because Matt DiBenedetto has been having a pretty good year in the NASCAR Truck Series. He made the playoffs this year in 2023, which this is the team's 3rd year in the Truck Series, and he's having a really good year the last couple years. Also last year in 2022, Matt DiBenedetto went on to win in the Truck Series at Talladega, albeit it was a very, very controversial finish the way he did go on to win that race, but he still went on to win the Truck Series race at Talladega, though some people like Brent Holmes should have won. But you look at Matt DiBenedetto, he's been having a really solid year in the Truck Series, so I was very, very surprised he's leaving the team. Which also there's a lot of questions about this as well. Why would you leave a team, a stable Truck Series team, when the team is really going on the up and go to another team? Unless you have something lined up. Now, my big question is with Matt DiBenedetto, where does he go? Because I think Matt DiBenedetto has become one of the more intriguing drivers in this silly season. Remember, a few years ago, he was in the NASCAR Cup Series for a couple years. He nearly won races in 2019. He had a chance to win that Bristol race, but got beat by Denny Hamlin because he had damage from trying to pass Ryan Newman, a lap-down car. With about 30 or 40 laps to go, got damaged there and got passed by Denny Hamlin. And then in 2020, he almost won a couple races that year with the Wood brothers. He didn't win, but he nearly did. He almost won both Vegas races and basically got penalized for what happened at Talladega and was in position to win that race. It would have, I think, been locked into the next round. And also in 2021, nearly won at the Spring Talladega race and was overall a very competitive driver in those years with the Wood brothers. And then he goes back to the Truck Series and does a pretty good job. He didn't make the playoffs, unfortunately, in 2021, but still did a very, very solid job. So I don't think Matt DiBenedetto is a bad driver. Now, how he handled himself at Phoenix later in the year in 2021 is something that probably should not happen the way he handled it, but I feel like he's been rejuvenating his career a little bit with the Rackley WAR team. Now, where does he go in 2024? Well, I think there's some interesting teams to look at. There are a lot of teams that could be open. Maybe he's going to be in the Xfinity Series or Truck Series. Again, there's some teams open in trucks. Maybe KBM perhaps, but I don't think that's very likely at this point. Let's go to the Xfinity Series. There are some teams that are available, I think, in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. You have Junior Motorsports, who could have a car available going into next year. There's some rumors of some big shuffles that are going at Junior Motorsports next year. We do know that Brandon Jones coming back to the 9 car, and we do know that Sam Mayer is likely returning to the 1 car in 2024. But we're not sure what's going on with Justin Allgaier. There's been some rumors he could be going to Kaulig Racing in the Xfinity Series next year in 2024. There's also other teams that could be available going into next year. You do have Kaulig Racing Xfinity Series team that could be a potential possibility for Matt DiBenedetto. That is one that I think that could be open up for him going into next year as well. But there's also been some rumors circulating about a potential Cup ride for Matt DiBenedetto. Some people mentioned the 31 car for Kaulig Racing. Remember, Chris Rice said this about a week ago, that they're looking at signing a shocking driver. The timing of this announcement is very convenient because Chris Rice said that this announcement is not going to happen for the next few years. And when I think of drivers that could be shocking to go 31 car, Matt DiBenedetto comes to mind. Because I think Matt DiBenedetto actually would do a pretty good job in the number 31 car next year. I think he'd be very, very competitive. I think he'd be very, very quick and very fast as well. And I think he would do a pretty solid job. Would he do as good as Justin Haley or A.J. Allmendinger done? Maybe. Maybe not, though. But we know Kaulig Racing is still a team that is looking to go on and up and up. And I do believe that Matt DiBenedetto could do a really good job with Kaulig Racing if it's Xfinity or trucks. If he goes Xfinity, I think he's going to be competing for wins. There's some rumors Dan Heimer could be out at the end of the year, and maybe Christian Eckes could head there as well. So maybe McAnally Hilgman and trucks could be a possibility. But again, people think that Matt DiBenedetto is a bad driver, and he's absolutely not a bad driver. The guy has won races in the Truck Series. He's been competing in the Cup Series. He has the same amount of wins as Daniel Hemrick. And I do think people give Matt DiBenedetto a lot of crap for the way he handles things. But to me, Matt DiBenedetto would do a pretty good job if he did return to the Cup Series. I don't think he'd be like a championship threat or anything by any stretch of imagination. I certainly don't think he's going to get a top 2 ride in the Cup Series. But if he does go to Kaulig Racing next year, it'd be very interesting. Because you look what he's done, like I said, at Rackley. He's been really good with the team this year. He got 6 consecutive top 10s in a row with the team and made the playoffs. And while he does have the worst average finish, he has more top 10s than Nick Sanchez and Matt Crafton this year. So he's done better than those 2 drivers on a consistent basis. And had he not had a bad week in Milwaukee, he'd be in contention to make the next round. And let's not forget, he's pretty good at Bristol. That's a really good track for Matt DiBenedetto, who would make the next round. He was also pretty fast at Kansas, so if he is in contention there at Kansas, I certainly think he'll be a threat to win there. And I think Matt DiBenedetto is going to be very interesting to see what happens to him going into next year. To me, I think he will be racing next year in 2024. I think it will be maybe Kaulig Racing. I think that would be a good team to go to. Could go to the 16 because we're not sure what's going on with Allmendinger past 2023. There's been some interesting rumors going on about him for next year in 2024. And the other big question is, who goes to the number 25 truck next year? My guess, it comes down to a few drivers, maybe Roger Carruth. Roger does not have a ride for 2024, and they don't have to worry about as much sponsorship funding for the 25 truck team, so maybe he goes there. You've also got Daniel Dye. Daniel Dye, apparently he has a ride going into 2023. There's some rumors that maybe he can go there, but there's also rumors, like I said, go back to Roger, that he could go to Spire Motorsports Truck Series team full-time in 2024. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to what happens with that silly season, but it's good to see that Matt's maybe having another chance and opportunity. I think it's very intriguing to see where he ends up in the 2024 season. I hope Matt DiBenedetto does get a really competitive ride, and hope he gets a great opportunity and chance in 2024. So, that is good for today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel, notifications on so if I win a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support my Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's video. Where do you think Matt DiBenedetto ends up in 2024? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what do you think happens with Ty Majeski? How do you feel about the penalty? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Tomorrow on the channel, there should be a silly season update dropping. On the channel, we've got a lot of silly season updates and recaps to talk about. Then on Saturday, I have the NASCAR Xfinity Series race review from Darlington. And then on Sunday, we'll probably be discussing Matt DiBenedetto and where I think he could end up in 2024. And also discuss the Cup Series race review for the Southern 500 as well. And then on Monday, we'll have another NASCAR news video dropping on the channel as well. And then on Tuesday, there might be another video dropping. We'll have to wait and see. Got a lot of great content on the channel that I cannot wait to share with you all. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.